Have you ever felt like God has given you an assignment, but he did not give you the resources to complete it? It's like you know that you're called to do something, but when you look at what you currently have in your hands, it doesn't feel like enough. If that sounds like you, I want to challenge your perspective today. Because maybe the reason why God has not been providing you with more is because he's been trying to stretch what you already have. And if that sounds confusing to you, don't worry, because we're going to break everything down in this episode. So let's talk about it. Today, I want to read to you a story in the Bible. And if you want to follow along, go to John chapter 6, verses 4 through 14. To give context of what this story is talking about, this is when Jesus performed a miracle in front of the people, and they were so in awe of this miracle that they started to follow him. And after they started following him and his disciples were discussing how they were going to feed these 5,000 people and their families. So starting at verse 4, it says, "Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, 'Where should we buy bread that these may eat?' But he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, 'There is a lad who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?' Then Jesus said, 'Make the people sit down.' Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and then the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, 'Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost.' Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, 'This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world.'" Okay, let's stop there and break down this story, because I know you're probably thinking, like, what does this have to do with anything? So in this story, Jesus and the disciples were going along their way, and a huge crowd of people saw their miracle and decided that they wanted to follow Jesus along with his disciples. So in this story, Jesus and his disciples felt like they were called to provide for these people. But when it came to the disciples, even though they felt like they were called to provide for these people, they did not feel like they had the resources to do so. Now, instead of giving up on this calling and saying, screw these people, they started to have a conversation about how they were going to fulfill this calling. They started discussing the resources that they had and the resources that they needed, trying to see how we can walk in this calling successfully. And as they were having this conversation, you'll notice that there was a lot of lack and a lot of unbelief in their talk. When Jesus asked Philip, you'll notice in verse 7 that Philip said, "What we have is not sufficient enough." So in other words, Philip immediately dismissed the assignment because he was looking at what they had instead of looking at who was in front of them. Then in verse 8, Andrew steps in and he says that there is a boy here that has 5 loaves and 2 small fish, but he ended the sentence with a but. He said, "What is that among all these people?" So he acknowledged that they had a resource available, but he immediately dismissed that resource because he felt like it was not enough to fulfill this calling. But as we see at the end of the story, Jesus had them sit the people down. Jesus used the resource that Andrew brought to his attention. And not only did he feed the 5,000 men, but he also fed their families as well. And the reason why we know this is because the same story is in Matthew chapter 14, verse 13 through 21. And verse 21 says that not only was the 5,000 men fed, but also their women and their children were fed as well. So Jesus took this resource that Andrew felt was not enough, that Andrew was about to dismiss, and he used it to feed 5,000 people and their family, along with having 12 baskets left over after everyone was provided for. And the revelation that God gave me as I was reading this story is that God will stretch what he has already provided you with. In this story, the disciples were looking at the way of getting the resources for this assignment in the same way that many of us look for it today. And many of us look for it in a way of increase. We will notice in verse 7, when Philip started answering Jesus, Philip immediately started talking about money. He said that 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient enough for them to feed all of these people. He was talking about using money to buy more, to get an increase in more resources. And Andrew did the same thing. Even though he didn't mention more, even though he didn't mention an increase, he did acknowledge that there was a resource available to them, but that resource was not enough. So, the reason why Andrew and Philip kept speaking from a place of lack is because they were so focused on the miracle coming from an increase. They were looking for a miracle that involved addition, even though Jesus wanted to do a miracle that involved multiplication. He was not looking to add more to what they had. He was looking to stretch what was already in their hands. But because they do not know that way, because they do not know that process, because they are already conditioned to believe that once they need to walk into something or once they need the resources for something, all they have to do is spend more or get more or add more or receive more, they were not open to any other way of a miracle coming to them. So once they seen that there was no possibility for them to get an increase, they automatically start speaking from a place of negativity. And the reason why I wanted to tell this story is because a lot of us do the exact same thing. When we pray to God for blessings, when we pray to God for the resources to walk into our purpose, when we pray for God for his journey and his process to get us to the things that he promised for us, we are always looking at it from a place of increase. God, give me more money. God, give me more resources. God, give me a new car. God, do a new thing in me. But what we fail to realize is that the Bible is here to show us the ways in which God moves. And so, yes, there are stories in the Bible where God increased the person. There are stories in the Bible where God blessed a person. But there are stories just like this that shows you that sometimes an increase was not the blessing. Sometimes God blessed you by stretching you. Sometimes God blessed you by stretching your resources and allowing what is already in your hands to be enough to fulfill you in your purpose. So many of us dismiss the callings and the purposes that God has given us because we do not feel like we have enough to do it. Jesus gave the disciples a calling. He said, there are 5,000 people coming and they are following me. How are we going to feed these people? It is our assignment, me and you together. It is your assignment, you and God together, to feed these people, to walk in this calling. Now let's discuss how we're going to make it happen. And you see that Andrew was immediately about to dismiss it because he said, what we have, the money that we have to go to the store and buy stuff is not sufficient enough to feed these people. So many of us are about to dismiss our calling or have been dismissing our calling because we feel like we do not have enough. You understand that you have this skill, but you feel like you don't have everything to fulfill it. You understand that you have this big idea, but you feel like it's not as big as other people in your family. You understand that you have a connection, but you don't really think that that person can take you to where God is trying to bring you to. God has given you something and you've been minimizing it because you feel like it does not have the capability to be the answer to your prayer. You do not feel like it has the capability to be the key that opens the door to your miracle. And God is saying, stop dismissing the very thing that I placed in your possession. Stop adding a but when you are talking about that thing. Instead of dismissing it, instead of focusing on it from a place of lack, bring that thing to me. Bring what's in your hands to me. Come to me as you are with what you have, and I will show you how to stretch it. This story is your proof that God will stretch what you have. And guess what? Not only does it show you that God will stretch your resources, but he will also stretch it beyond capacity. And what I mean by that is he will stretch it enough to cover and provide your needs, but he also will stretch it even farther where other people will be able to benefit from it too. Think about it. In verses 8 through 9, Andrew mentioned that there was a boy who was already there that had the 5 loaves and had the 2 fish. That boy was a part of the crowd that was following Jesus. That boy had a family who was in that crowd that was following Jesus. So he gave his resources to God. He gave his resources to Jesus. And not only did Jesus stretch it enough for him to be able to be fed, for his family to be able to be fed, for his loved ones to be able to be fed, but he stretched it beyond capacity where every single person who was there benefited from this little boy's resource. This is what happens when you give your little to God, when you give that thing that you feel like is not enough, when you give that thing that you have been overlooking, you give it to God. He multiplies it into something that will overflow. And it will not just overflow for you, but it will be a benefit for someone else. And that sounds amazing, right? But I have to be real with you because I cannot lead you astray. Some of you, you're not going to experience the overflow. And it's not because God doesn't want to, but it's because you don't know how to surrender. See, when we look at this story and we talk about this boy and him having these 5 loaves of bread, a lot of us in this position would not have done what the little boy did. Imagine being in a crowd full of 5,000 families, and you are the only one who has food to eat. Now, if that was us, most of us would not be willing to give our food away. We would have the mentality of, well, I got to make sure I'm good. We would have the mentality of, well, I got to make sure my family eats. The only thing I can offer y'all is a prayer. I pray that God makes a way for you, but I can't give up what I have. I can't give up the little that I have to help you. We would not be willing to surrender our little resource for God to even use it and make an overflow. And so some of us have to be real, because you're going to hear this message of God stretching what you have and multiplying what you have and letting it overflow where you have more than enough and it's raining down on other people and other people are being blessed from it. And you're going to be clapping your hands and saying, yes, God, this message is for me. But I have to be real with you, because as long as you have that heart posture where you are not willing to surrender, as long as you have that heart posture where you are not willing to give up your little to even allow it to be stretched to help yourself and help other people, this is not going to be your testimony. Some of you have a problem with giving now. You don't want to give your time and volunteer. You don't want to give to churches because you feel like that's an organization and I'm not giving to no church. That's not really giving to God. You don't want to give nothing back to God. You don't want to do nothing God's way. You don't want to bring your resources to Him. You don't want to give to the homeless person that you see on the street. You don't want to donate to any organizations. You don't want to do anything. But then you're going to hear this message and you're going to be like, yes, this is going to be my testimony. God's going to, take what I have and stretch it and help me overflow. But my question to you is, what happens when God asks you to give Him something that He gave you? What happens when He asks you to give Him the resource to stretch it? What happens when you're in the position that the little boy is in? He is in a crowd among 5,000 people's families. He is the only one who has a resource that can help him and also help them. And Jesus come and ask him, hey, give me that bread. Give me that fish. What happens if the little boy said, no, I'm thinking about my family. I'm thinking about me being fed. I can't give it to you. I can't trust you with this. I can't trust that if I give this to you, you will stretch this enough for me to be okay and also help everyone else who is here. A lot of us are selfish and a lot of us are holding on to the resources, and we will refuse to give that resource back to God. We will refuse to do things God's way because we don't trust that He will make sure that we are okay. And until we do that, this story that I told you, this story that I shared with you, is not going to be our testimony. We have to be okay doing things God's way. Not understanding how it's going to work. I'm sure that little boy was like, you're going to take my 5 loaves of bread and you're going to take my 2 fish and you're going to stretch it to feed 5,000 people and their families? How? I don't think that's going to work. but he trusted God enough to say, I surrender what I have to you. And that's the point that I need you to take. I'm not saying literally take every dollar that you have and give it to the church or give it to an organization. I'm saying surrender. Go to God and ask him, what's the assignment with this resource? If you gave me money, how do you want me to spend this money? What do you want me to put it in? Maybe he tells you he wants you to put a portion of your money into this that's going to help provide for you and then provide for other people. If the resource is time, God, what's the assignment over my time? What do you want me to spend it on? If the resource is a laptop to help you in a business that he's been calling you to start, God, show me how to stretch my laptop that's on this last leg that I feel like is about to break any minute and I don't have the money to buy a new one. Show me how to stretch this laptop or stretch it so that I can use it in order to fulfill my assignment of starting the business. Take it back to God and let him use it. When you look at this story, you notice that the first thing that happened was that the boy had to surrender his resource to Jesus. Then, before Jesus distributed the resource to the people, he gave thanks to God. Then, that's when it got stretched. So your assignment is number 1, to surrender, and number 2, give thanks. Stop talking about that resource with a but. Yeah, I have this, but it ain't enough. That's ungratefulness. You have to give thanks to God for the little. And once you do that, watch how he stretches that little and make sure that you are okay. Make sure that you are fulfilled in it. Make sure that you are at peace with it. And provide for you with that very thing that you've been overlooking and feeling like is not enough. And so the main thing that I want you to take from this is, if you are in a place where God has been calling you for more, God gave you a vision, he gave you a promise, he gave you an instruction, and you feel like you do not have what is needed in order for you to fully walk into that thing. Instead of going to him and saying, maybe this isn't the right time, instead of going to him and constantly praying for him to give you more or provide you with more resources in order to do this thing, I want you to ask him, is the reason why you are not providing me with more is because you have already given me enough? Ask him, what have you provided me with that I have been overlooking? What have you provided me with that you see things differently than the way that I see things? I see things from the standpoint of Andrew and Philip, of this not being enough. But you see things from the standpoint of this is enough and I'm going to stretch it and you're going to use this thing. It's going to be a miracle and you're going to use it to fulfill this assignment. What am I overlooking? And once he shows you that very resource that he wants you to use that you feel like is not enough, instead of talking about it from a place of lack, instead of complaining about it, instead ask him, God, stretch this. Show me how to walk into this calling using this thing as it is, not needing more, but as it is. When I first read this story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 families, the revelation that I got is that God will not send you out without first providing you with what you need. Because the reason why Jesus wanted to feed these people so badly is because they were about to go home. They were following him and they were about to go out and do their own thing. And so he wanted to make sure that they were provided for and they were fed before that happened. And God spoke to me and he said, I will not send you out somewhere without first providing you with the resources that you need. And so what this is showing me with the first revelation that God gave me is that if he's not providing you with what you need, then you already have what you need in your possession. If he's about to send you out, call you to do something, give you an instruction that you need to walk, and he's not adding more resources, then you already have enough where you are. You just have to change your perspective. And that change of perspective comes through praying to him for clarity and praying to him to see things the way that he sees it. And so I have talked enough. That is all that I have for you today. Before we go, I do want to give you an action step to do. So sometime this week, I want you to think about what you already have in your possession. Write down every resource, gift, connection, or opportunity that is currently in your hands, even if it feels minor or small. Then, instead of asking God for more, ask Him to stretch what you already have. Pray over it, give it to Him, thank Him for it, and watch what He does in your life. But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. But that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.